If folks could please kind of come in and make their way into their seats so we can begin on time.
Thanks, guys.
Lynn is ringing the bell. So we're going to get started here because it's 3:30. Welcome back, everyone, to the remainder of our afternoon session. We are going to begin with a presentation on Great Salt Lake Rising from Tim Hawks and Josh Romney. So take it away, guys.
Thank you. We grabbed a handheld mic because I don't like staying behind a podium. So I just want to give a little background in my involvement. I'm a recent convert to the Great Salt Lake, so I'm going to be newer than a lot of you and know a lot less than a lot of you. And in some ways that's an advantage, in some ways a disadvantage. But I will just say the Romney family history, I have a lot of political history in my family, as most of you probably know. And one of the common traits of the Romney family political history is we tend to be right, but right too early. And being right too early in politics is actually really a bad thing. You don't get rewarded for it. As I look out in this room, a lot of you have been right on this issue for a long time, but you've been right way too early. And I think that's a challenge. And I think that's a legitimate challenge if you think about trying to convince Utahns how important and how significant the lake is. And so one of the areas that I felt would be important is to step into this environment and talk to people that I know and convince them how important the lake is for their livelihood, for their businesses, for their health of their kids and their grandkids. And that message coming from one of their peers, I think, has landed pretty well. And so one of the things I did, I grabbed... I actually got Brine Steed, was one of the first people I called and said, Brine, I want to pull together as many of the wealthy, powerful people in Utah that I can come up with. I want to put them in a room and I want you to present to them the solution to the lake. And his response was, well, we have this much in our budget, and so this is kind of what we can do. And I was like, no, I don't want that answer. I want the solution to the lake. He's like, well, the political reality is you can only raise this much, so here's what we can kind of do. I'm like, you're not hearing me. I want to know what the answer is. He goes, well, the answer is you have to live within your means. You can't spend more than you have. I said, I don't want to know. I will figure out the spending side. You tell me what the solution is. It took me like multiple phone calls to finally help him understand. I wanted to know the real budget, the real number, which he presented, fortunately. So one of the things I was able to do is convince some of my friends and a couple people from the state to join a board and to join me in creating a foundation called Great Salt Lake Rising. This year, we've actually raised $30 million, and we'll continue to raise more. Our goal is to raise $100 million this year, which I think I actually have high confidence we're going to be able to accomplish. $100 million, as you know, does not fix the lake. We can't fix the lake for $100 million, but it does allow us to have a voice in a room that we didn't have a voice before, with the legislature, with the LDS Church, with the business community, with Utahns as a whole, and to bring all those people together to help save the lake. So these people are all highly dedicated to rescuing the lake. Multiple of them donated. So Crystal Magalette is up there. Her family donated $10 million. Greg Miller is up there. His family donated $10 million. Karen Marriott is another who's not up here, but could be, and maybe in our next board meeting. Her family donated $10 million. Marriott family, by the way, is not. Their headquarters is in Washington, D.C. And when I talked to their board, they said, we don't do environmental causes. And I was like, oh, phew, good, because this isn't an environmental cause. This is an economic cause. And they're like, oh, in that case, we can look at it. So that's the beauty of the Great Salt Lake, is you can be, obviously it's an environmental cause. We can care wildly about the birds and all the habitat and all the incredible pristine beauty of the lake. All that is really powerful and connects with some. It doesn't connect with all. I found that the health impact connects with everyone. The economic impact connects with just about everyone. And so there is something in this for everyone, which gives me a ton of hope that we can fix this lake. Everybody should care. Everybody should care. And that's one of the beauties. I will just say, from my perspective, what I've seen in these conversations I've had with these powerful leaders, these titans of industry in Utah, they care a lot about their state. There's something unique about Utah in that people really, really care about the state. It's ingrained in them. I'm not from Utah originally, but I love this state. It is now my home state. I've been here for 20 years. It's now my home state. It's where I want my kids to grow up. It's where I want them to stay. I feel a tremendous connection to it, and a lot of people feel that. Most Utahns, I think, feel that. When you go to Nebraska, they don't necessarily have that same sentiment. Or Iowa, I'm picking on Nebraska, but I'll pick on Iowa because that's a state that didn't vote for my dad. So Iowans don't care about Iowa as much as Utahns care about Utah. And so that is one of the incredible things we have. And as you look at all these saline lakes around the world, 120 of them all in decline, if we can't fix it here, no saline lake can be fixed. This is it. If we can't do it here, it cannot be done. The good news is we are going to do it. There's no option. The downside of not fixing this is so massive and so severe that there's just no option that we don't fix it. The only question in my mind is, does it have to get a lot worse before we fix it? Or are we at the point now, is it bad enough now that we can actually do it? I think it's bad enough now. I think this bad snow year is actually, for a lot of us, a huge blessing. It's an opportunity for people to start paying attention to the lake and the real impacts. I think that data center development, as long as it doesn't get built, is potentially a huge blessing for people to wake up and be like, we really need to care for our state. We really need to do things that we're thinking about future generations, and the actions we're taking now impact future generations. And I think it feels like this is the year that's happening. We see a tremendous wave of support and energy. Somehow I convinced 3 people to give me $10 million. I don't know how I did that. So obviously, people are waking up to it. One of the other things we've seen is Governor Cox, who had a 30-year rescue plan. Soon after our meeting with, I'm not saying we caused it, but I feel like maybe we nudged him. But sooner after our meeting with those powerful titans of industry in Utah, he announced a lake rescue by the Olympics, which is really exciting. That is a huge shift. The 30-year rescue plan was pretty much let the lake die and see what happens. So this is huge. From my perspective, we committed the rescue in 2025. This is in the fall of last year. I think we can stop the decline within a couple years. I think by the time they have the Salt Lake Temple open house, there are enough things we can do from U.S. Magnesium. That was one. And Joel's going to talk a little bit about U.S. Magnesium in a second. But U.S. Magnesium was one where I got a call from Joel Ferry late at night one night. He said, I think I have a chance to get 80,000 acre-feet of water. Are you interested? I said, very much. We went back and forth and for over the next few weeks. And he just said, he goes, I think I can have the state pay for it, but I don't know if they will. He goes, could Great Salt Lake Rising backstop me? Because if I win this bid and the state isn't ready to backstop me, I might go to prison. So to keep Joel out of prison, we agreed to backstop him. I didn't have the money either, but I promised him I'd have it in time. And that was part of how we were able to raise some money, because now we're on the hook for paying back the state on half of that. And then ultimately, I think we're going to have a healthy lake by 2034. And what does a healthy lake mean? I think it's different for everyone, but the lake is going to be increasing. It may not be at full capacity by 2034, but it's going to be close. And this will be, when people come to Utah to see the Olympics here, this will be part of the story, is look what they've done in Utah. They've rescued, the only saline rescue lake in the world has been done here, and now we can replicate it in other places and learn what they've done. From my perspective, again, when I'm looking at how do we save this, how do we get 800,000, I'm actually going for 1.2 million acre feet, why not? So if we can get 1.2 million acre feet of water in the lake relatively easily, and I say that, I know how hard it is, but this costs billions, not trillions, billions. This is $3 to $4 billion to rescue a lake. In the grand scheme, if we don't rescue it, the potential cost to Utahns is hundreds of billions. Hundreds of billions. So to say we're going to rescue it for $3 billion is nothing. The state of Utah, by the way, last year bonded for 2 high schools for $900 million. So 2 high schools for $900 million, rescuing the lake for $3 billion is nothing. Obviously, we want to get a lot from the federal government. We're going to get a lot from the state. We're going to get a lot from the private sector, from philanthropy and private sector. $3 billion to rescue a lake like this is actually so doable and relatively inexpensive for the potential costs. And so I've just put some numbers up here that, that show, this is the depletion on the far left, the target reduction in the middle, and potential savings on the right. So agriculture is not going to solve this problem alone. This is not, it cannot be done by agriculture alone. We absolutely have to have the residential side do it. And in my opinion, the residential municipal side needs to lead on this effort. We need to show agriculture that we're serious. If we're going to grow Kentucky bluegrass and overwater it by 50%, we can't expect agriculture to make big changes, especially when on the residential side, all it costs us is a little bit of green on our lawn. For the agricultural side, it costs them real money in their pocketbook. So, so there's absolutely no way we can ask agriculture to make these changes if we're not willing to do it on the residential side. So we are going to do that, and obviously on the agricultural side, they need to be compensated for it. I will just say I'm really excited to be part of a group like this. It's really encouraging to see how many of you are in this room that care about the Great Salt Lake, that are willing to come and spend your day, a couple days, working on how to solve it. I'm honored to be part of this group. I'm hoping we can all get to know each other better, and I can help you do your work. I'm not going to do the science. I'm not going to do the hard work. That's what all of you are here for. I'm just here to sell and raise money. So I'm going to try and raise money. I'm going to try and get the legislature on board. But I want to help you in this room be successful in all the efforts you're undertaking to save the Great Salt Lake. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Josh, and good afternoon, everybody. Tim Hawks, I'm the Interim Executive Director for Great Salt Lake Rising. I've been reflecting a lot today. I think this is my 5th Issues Forum, and suffice it to say that back in the day there were decidedly fewer people here. And it's really rewarding to show up at a meeting like this, and I see a lot of people that have been engaged for years and years on Great Salt Lake and have dedicated, just to see so many bright, capable people engaged in doing their part is just so rewarding. And then what's super exciting is to see all of this new energy and new dynamism and new people coming in. And I want to take a moment to just express my appreciation to all of you that have been in the trenches for so many years, and then folks that are coming in like Josh. Josh just told his story. And one of the things I really admire about Josh is he's not limited by the vision of us mere mortals, right? He's done a phenomenal job of really lifting our collective vision of what's possible, and that's huge. So you guys saw Director Ferry here a little while ago. No lie, Joel Ferry and I were in the legislature. This was just 5 years ago. It feels like 10, but 5 years ago, we sat around before the legislative session and we were scheming and hoping that somehow we might be able to get $1 million for Great Salt Lake. $1 million. We hoped that we could do that. I think we got 400,000. We've given each other high fives and stuff like that. So, Josh has really come in and others have come in and really lifted our vision of what's possible. So when Josh says without hesitation, we're going to raise $100 million and we're going to leverage that. And then we're going to spend whatever it takes to get this done. You can sense in the story that he told how he's helped us really lift our vision of what's possible. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about just the operational side of Great Salt Lake Rising, what it's doing, and how it really is positioned to kind of fulfill that vision. So one fair question that folks might ask is why another group? This is a really crowded space, right? There's a lot of people working on Great Salt Lake already. Do we really need another group to come in? It's a fair question, but let me talk about the different efforts that Rising is pursuing and kind of give you some illustration or flavor for how that works. But one is just this idea of having private capital, which is so much more fluid than public funds and can really ride to the rescue. I sort of say it's like almost like a fire truck that can go and put the fire out quickly, right? Because sometimes our federal or state money doesn't move quite that same way. Private capital can move that way. And so Josh told the story about U.S. Magnesium and how having Rising backstop the state's bid made that possible. So, a great example of how working together you can really expand the possible. I'll talk about another one. This is you probably saw it in the news. It was announced in the last 3 to 4 weeks, but it's this water lease for Great Salt Lake with Metropolitan Water, which is a joint effort for Salt Lake City and Sandy City. And effectively what they're doing is they're recognizing that their people have saved a lot of water in their yards, in their homes and businesses. And they're saying because we've seen that water savings, we feel confident in leasing water downstream to the lake. And this is a deal that was put together by the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust. Now, in that case, Great Salt Lake Rising comes in at the end. And they didn't need us to make that deal happen. But when Rising comes in at the end with capital to support that project, it helps extend the reach of the Watershed Enhancement Trust. It enables them to go out into the community and do more projects, and so to get more done quicker. So that's another example of how that private capital, again, can help leverage and help other people do their job better, faster. We talked a little bit about Newfoundland Basin, but that's another illustration where just reconnecting some water that was historically coming to Great Salt Lake, we might be able to help facilitate that kind of program, and again, in a way where private capital can make it happen faster. We can step in water leasing. We just had a program funded by the state for about $1.3 million. Anyone want to predict how fast that money's going to go? It's going to go super fast, right? But if we have private capital, we can step into the gap and make sure that these projects continue to happen and we sustain that momentum. The other aspect, and you've seen this alluded to many times today, and I just alluded to it, is just how crowded the space is. I think that's a good news because it shows how much energy and excitement there is about the lake, how many people want to get involved. And I think the real challenge is figuring out how everybody can contribute the best they can in the best way possible, right? I mean, honestly, that's what we want. We talk about lifting where we stand, right? Lengthening our stride, these sort of ideas. Let's help everybody, whatever they can contribute, however they can contribute, let's help them do that as best we can. And so I think a big part of what Rising hopes to do is where there's a need to coordinate and facilitate between these private groups, can we step in and facilitate working groups on specific issues that might arise on a short-term basis or even a long-term basis? Can we stand those up and help move those forward? It doesn't mean we do all of the work, but we help coordinate all those people that are working in this space. Can we coordinate engagement with the state? Can we coordinate in working with the federal government, which is a really exciting thing where we're seeing a lot of progress being made. So the second role is that coordination role. And the third is really just in public outreach and messaging. A lot is going on in this space. And again, it's not like Rising wants to own the entire space to be the only messenger out there. It's more like, how can we, again, magnify that voice? How can we reach new audiences, right? How can we speak really to business and community leaders and engage them in new and exciting ways? And so we want to get the message out there. For a few years now, we've had the Great Salt Lake Business Council. How can we really expand that where more and more Utah businesses get engaged? And how can we make sure that we're reaching people, not where we want them to be or hope that they are, but let's reach them where they're at, right? Whatever their motivation might be to save water, let's meet them where they're at and make sure that we're messaging in a way that they find compelling. I think there's some really exciting things. You get a sense from a guy like Josh, he knows a lot of people. He knows a lot of bands. But, you could do benefit concerts. I mean, all kinds of really exciting things that we could do to help promote Great Salt Lake. So hopefully just give you a little bit of a sense between Josh talking about how Great Salt Lake Rising came about and me just talking about just some of these different ways that we might engage. I've got one last little story. You've seen this talked about, the Trump tweet. But I think the Trump tweet is really an illustration of this public-private partnership working together. Donald Trump doesn't just wake up one day and tweet about Great Salt Lake, right? So you saw on our list of Great Salt Lake Rising board members, Mark Burnett, who is the producer of The Apprentice and Survivor. He got to know Donald Trump when he was working on The Apprentice, and a few years ago, Mark moved to Park City, Utah. And he started hearing people talk about Great Salt Lake. And so you can imagine when Mark talks to President Trump, and he does quite frequently, guess what he talks about? Great Salt Lake. President, you got to help us with Great Salt Lake. Then you pair that with Governor Cox, got a one-on-one meeting with Donald Trump, with the president. He told him, You have 15 minutes to tell me, kind of what's most important in your world. And the first thing out of Governor Cox's mouth, most important issue that he wanted to draw the president's attention to was Great Salt Lake. And it was at that meeting, which went an hour and a half instead of the 15 minutes it was scheduled for, that the president actually did this tweet: "We're going to make the Great Salt Lake great again." Again, just a nice illustration of a public-private partnership and how, working together, we can really empower some amazing stuff. So with that, we have about 10 minutes, I think. If there's any questions, I'll invite Josh back up here, and we're happy to answer any burning questions you may have about Great Salt Lake Rising. I see Dita coming up. I'm sure she has a real softball for us, right? Dita, always?
We turned off her mic. Hold it down.
It's a sign, Dita. It's a sign.
Hold it down. Shout it.
I'm really concerned about the Mountainous Basin. I think we think that and I'm Dept with the Center for Biological Diversity, that if we dewater that area, we're dewatering wildlife habitat. Because right now, the West Desert, where there's water, is really refuge for birds that are being, closed out from all the areas on the east side that are being subject to industrial development. So I'm just wondering, what are you thinking about this? It feels like, I could see you're discussing it. It feels like there needs to be more investigation of what the consequences might be, and also, really how much water are we so when you put that out there, are you also saying, yes, and we're going to explore this, we're not launching into this right away? Because I think there are big question marks.
Yeah, and I'll start, and then Josh can answer too. I mean, look, it's completely anecdotal. I've been out there, right? I didn't see a lot of wildlife use, but I understand that I'm not out there. We really don't know.
It's
Obviously,
a playa, right? It's wet intermittently. So.
Yeah. We obviously want to understand that, right? Mm-hmm. But what I would say is historically this is connected habitat with Great Salt Lake, and it was because of human activity that really disconnected it from it. So I think it's worth studying. The studies suggest there's quite a bit of water out there. And this water would otherwise flow into Great Salt Lake, but for all the plumbing changes we did when we put the pumps out there that disconnected that playa from the lake itself.
I would say, from the Great Salt Lake Rising perspective, we're not going to do anything without the commissioner's office approval. So we're not going to go out willy-nilly and cut a hole in that basin without them having studied it, and I know they're studying it now. So everything we're going to do coordinating is going to coordinate through Brian Steed's office and with Joel Ferry, and so they will study that. I would ultimately say saving the Great Salt Lake also has a massive bird and wildlife population. So ultimately, I don't know exactly what the populations are in relation, but I'm going to lead towards saving the Great Salt Lake and making sure that is a sustainable habitat for wildlife going forward. But I will absolutely follow the science in Brian Steed's office and what they recommend on that.
And so just one last thing on this. So the issue, and you mentioned this, Josh, when you mentioned the data center, I'm assuming you were talking about the box elder.
I wasn't referring to anything, just random. I'm not going on the record on anything. I'll say that. But you can assume whatever you want, Dita.
Okay. Well, so here's the thing. There's a lot of industrial development happening on the borders of the lake, and a lot of that is happening in wetlands. And it's, we're losing bird habitat at an incredibly rapid clip right now. And so then when you're suggesting we'll add the Newfoundland Basin into the mix, it causes concern. We have to look at the cumulative effect of all of this industrial development on these wetlands, and no one really is doing that, and we have a lot of concern about it because, we're not going to save Great Salt Lake if we destroy all the wetlands, right?
Yeah,
so.
I would say I don't know any developer in the world that's allowed to develop in wetlands.
Well, no.
But hold on, Dita. You asked a question. I'm going to answer it, okay. And you put the mic down because we'll move on to the next question. I will just say this: I am a developer. I know how this works. You can't develop in wetlands. It's against the law. There's an Army Corps of Engineer. especially if it's navigable wetlands, which everything around the Great Salt Lake is. Dita, I'm gonna
So
let you finish
just let
there.
me say one thing about the wetlands that's important to what you just said, and that is that there are biological wetlands and jurisdictional wetlands, and it's true you can't develop in jurisdictional wetlands, but you can, people are developing in what are biological wetlands, okay? So that's that.
And I think this is actually really helpful to understand part of the reason why this is such a tough issue in saving the Great Salt Lake. Because we're all here trying to do the same thing. We want the Great Salt Lake rescued. We can start to get really narrow in certain things, and if you want to make this like anti-development, anti-growth, anti-future of Utah, this is going to fail. I mean, I'll just tell you that right now. Hold on. This is going to fail. If you want to pit Utahns against Utah and say, we're anti-growth, we can't have any development. Dita, I'm going to ask you to stop. I'm going to finish my sentence. I'm going to ask you to stop. If you want to pit Utahns against Utahns and say we are anti-development, we're anti-growth, this is going to fail.
Okay,
Hold on.
I'm not anti-growth. All about where.
I'm not done speaking. Dita, could you have a seat? Is that all right?
I'm not anti-growth, for the record. It's all about where we build things, okay? And I'm going to sit down now.
If you'd like to ask me a question, I'm happy to answer it. The reality is, saving Utah Lake, the Great Salt Lake, is probably the most pro-development thing you can do. I'm a developer. It's what I do. I can't develop. The future of the state for development and growth is at risk if we don't save the Great Salt Lake. This is a huge challenge. And if we don't save the Great Salt Lake, the future of development, the future of home ownership, our future as a state is at risk. And I think one of the real challenges we have in this room, I think this actually points it out really well, if we want to fight amongst ourselves, we are going to fail. We cannot do this if we want to fight Utahns and fight growth. This is going to fail. We absolutely have to come together on this and say we're on the same side. We need the real estate developers behind us. In fact, this is one of my biggest pitches and some of the people that I'm having the easiest time raising money from. Because I talk to realtors. I own one of the largest mortgage companies in the state. When I talk to realtors and they say, I had 3 listings canceled this week because people are scared of the Great Salt Lake. I had a family, there's a guy I know that was buying a $15 million house in Deer Valley who said, I am no longer buying this house only because of the Great Salt Lake. I spent my weekend researching it. That is a huge problem. So when you want to talk about the impact this is going to have on Utah, this is a huge problem. And we cannot afford to pit the future, like growth and development, against the Great Salt Lake. These come together. Development works really, really well in Salt Lake if it's done smartly. We can develop millions more houses if they're built smartly. If we want to do a lot of huge lawns and landscapes and all that stuff, we can't. Like, that's it. We can't grow in Utah. But if we want to continue to grow and have an economically viable state and an economically successful state, we absolutely have to continue to grow, but grow very, very smartly.
So I had this question before this.
Yeah. I only say this because Dita hit me a couple times on one of my projects in Great Salt Lake that's not in wetlands. It's on desert ground, and she went after me a bunch on it. So I kind of figured that was coming back.
That's okay. I like that this kind of set the stage for me to open this. So I'm just here as a member of the public, and I've been sensing over the past week specifically, there's a lot of distrust between the general public and some of the movers and shakers in the state, the government, as well as people like yourself that are very wealthy. And I think part of that's because we can't necessarily maybe relate to the same things. You have different questions than I do about the lake. So what are you doing specifically to build that trust and to get that outreach? Because I know you talked about trying to reach out to the average voter. How are you fomenting a relationship of trust there and getting information across different types of backgrounds across Utahns?
So from my perspective, we are going to work with the people already in the space that are already doing the hard work. I don't want to go out and buy water rights ever. Marcelle Shoup is really good at that. That's what she does. I want to support her and continue to do that. My goal is actually to bring the people, the wealthy people to the table and say, you have a lot at risk. You've gained a lot from the state. You need to give back to the lake. And my goal is to help them funnel it in the right areas, to say we are going to spend the time and research to spend your money and your investment in the right places. Sometimes that'll be with Marcel. Sometimes it'll be on a marketing campaign with Grow the Flow. Sometimes it'll be, you know, with Friends of Salt Lake, and they have some efforts they need to do. So we are not in the business of trying to solve all the problems, but work with those who already are. And what I'm trying to do is collaborate the business community, get them on board, get them invested, and have them carry the weight that they should be carrying. That they have the most to lose if the Great Salt Lake loses. And they're doing, at this point, doing the very least. And I'm trying to switch that. And those of you who are doing all this work, you know, you may, it's like you maybe don't have as much to lose as they do financially. But you're working your guts out. And I want to try and make it a little bit more even. If you have a lot, if you've made a lot from the state and if you have a lot of money, you should absolutely be giving a piece of that back in efforts to save the Great Salt Lake.
One more thing. I just want to thank you for taking Joel's phone call about the $30 million to purchase U.S. magnesium. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. I just one brief comment on that middle question, which is, and to Dita's point, I just say, listen, we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. We have shared values. We want to save this important resource. But to the discussion of connecting to normal people, a lot of us that have been working on Lake a long time, we've really invested hard to make this not devolve into an us versus them type fight. We're really looking and we're really deeply invested in solutions that are voluntary and collaborative and create genuine win-wins. So when you look at what we're doing in ag, it's not like we're going to come take your water, but can we find a solution that works with you and with your community? Down to the local water user and their yard, can we provide them with the tools where they feel like if I save water, it actually makes a difference. It actually benefits the lake versus it just goes to development or it just goes to a server farm or whatever. So we're really working hard to keep everybody in because everybody contributes to this problem. It's going to take all of us working together to solve it. So we work really hard to try to do that.
Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it.
Come on up. I think that downer side, downer right.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back here at the Issues Forum once again. I've presented a couple times in the past, and I'm thinking about the slides that I put together last week and sent to Katie, and thinking about the discussion that we had today, and there's a lot of things I would have changed on this presentation based on what we just talked about. But I'm Jeff McCreary. I'm the Director of Operations for Ducks Unlimited, and I manage our conservation programs in the 9 westernmost states. And I want to try to tie a few things together that have been coming up today. And that last conversation was amazing because when we think about what it takes to do this work, like we talk about salinity, we talk about dust, we talk about birds, but really it's about people. Conservation takes a community. And what I've found in the work in the 9 westernmost states is that the easy things are done. We did those. And DU's been responsible for a lot of these. The hard work is what's left. The hard work is what we're doing right now, and this ain't easy. This is hard stuff. Not only is it technically hard, but it's hard from a social and political aspect. And all the more reason when we think about what it takes to do conservation, conservation takes a community. It takes people. People are part of this ecosystem. We're not going away, but we have the agency to help change the trajectory that our system is in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why DU, why am I up here talking about what are we doing as part of this community to make change and make it better for not only the natural environment, but also for the people that live here. One of the quotes that I really like from Aldo Leopold is that his definition of conservation is a state of harmony between people and the land. All right, so think about that while you're reminiscing on today and hopefully what I'll talk about going forward here. So why DU? Why Great Salt Lake? Well, why DU? Well, what's Ducks Unlimited? You guys are duck hunters or? No, we're the world's leader in wetland conservation. We specialize in implementation of wetland and waterfowl habitat conservation work. We specialize in, and I'll show some examples of this, on the ground physical improvements. We live everywhere. We live in a managed watershed. Somebody makes a decision about how water is applied to the landscape. That includes a wildlife refuge, a waterfowl management area, a private duck club, a preserve, your lawn, however you think about it. Water is applied because somebody turns on a valve, somebody opens a gate, somebody manages a dam or a canal. And so if we're thinking about what it takes to manage wetlands, like anywhere here, you have to have a managed system in order to deliver the water there. So we specialize in doing that. We do land protection, we do science, and I'll talk about all these types of things. So we're implementers of conservation. And why DU? Well, when we think about the Pacific Flyway, there's a little dot about where Great Salt Lake is in the Pacific Flyway. And this is a representation, is that the Pacific Flyway is the superhighway of birds that stretches from Mexico to Russia, and billions of birds travel this route every year, north and south. And many of these birds use what we call the big three. So from a waterfowl perspective, 80% of the waterfowl in the Pacific Flyway use one or more of these landscapes. Tundra swans, northern pintails are classic examples. They're coming into Great Salt Lake, they're going over to the Central Valley, they're going back up to Klamath, and they'll kind of repeat this on an annual cycle. And so why the big three? And because 80% of the birds. So if we lose one of these landscapes, it's got continental implications. It's got population impacts, and that's just ducks, right? The Great Salt Lake has got the biggest, the most, the densest, the largest. Of you name the bird species, we got it like nobody else has got it. So if we lose the lake, it's not just ducks that suffer. It's all of our shorebirds and other water birds that are highly dependent upon this amazing place. So when we think about the Great Salt Lake initiative that we had on that front slide, so that's DU's effort to make a difference, to put our shoulder to the wheel here in Utah in one of these big three landscapes. And in the roundtable that the governor had this fall, I was able to present alongside Josh about what are our investments in the Great Salt Lake going to be. What are we doing to help make a difference? And so we created a vision. We called it actually Great Salt Lake 2035 before we knew Governor Cox had a Great Salt Lake 2034, so we're kind of wrestling with that. But it's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the date. The vision is we envision a vibrant and dynamic Great Salt Lake watershed that supports migratory waterfowl, resilient ecosystems, Utah communities, and Utah economies. Right? It's this balance, this harmonious state between the land and our people. So I want to give you a little bit of some more detail about what that looks like. So we've talked a lot about the data. We're hearing a lot about the policies. So let's talk about action. And that's what Ducks Unlimited is all about. So in our vision, and when you see DU's vision, I hope you see the face of Karina Hebert, because she was responsible for putting this together and putting an amazing package together and analyzing what the opportunities are. And so we came up with these 5 categories. So ecosystem resilience, land conservation, invasive species, science and planning, and public policy. And I'll give some examples about what that means. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing and what we plan to do in these arenas. So this is serious stuff. Like, Josh raises $100 million. Well, we got a hole to put $100 million in right here. So, and that is just the beginning of this vision. And if we would redo this assessment, it might be twice that much, right? Josh is not kidding that it's billions of dollars to do all this work, and it's not cheap. And this is just our first estimate about what these kind of categories of activities would be, what the scale of this impact would be. So $100 million, you might be able to affect 50,000 acres on the ground. So what are these things? What does this look like? What's going on? In 2022, I was up here talking, and I had this title slide, Wetland Needs Water. So Great Salt Lake needs water, right? So I don't know if we were ahead of schedule, as Josh was implying, but maybe we're right on schedule. And at the end of this talk, I had an advertisement. You'll see a slide, a very similar slide. And that was right before we hired Karina to come in and start leading and rebuilding our efforts in Great Salt Lake. And it's super exciting what she and the rest of the team has been able to do. And it looks a little bit like this. So Joel mentioned some of the work on infrastructure is really important. So I want to spend some time talking about aging wetland infrastructure and why that's important. This year, when you think about where the wetlands are and where the waterbird habitat is around Great Salt Lake, it's right on that edge. It's managed wetlands. Almost every acre, except for a huge chunk on the Great Salt Lake Shorelands Preserve, is in some kind of managed wetland. If there's water in the landscape, it's in a managed wetland. It's in the wildlife refuge, it's in our WMAs, and it's in a whole bunch of private duck clubs that are scattered throughout the Great Salt Lake. And that is the only habitat, essentially, that is existing for waterfowl habitat on the lake this year. So these habitats, when we think about getting water to the lake, it's also got to include this wetland ecosystem that's associated with it. And we've got these are some examples of some 80-year-old infrastructure that helps keep these wetlands vibrant and alive, and they're in desperate need of upgrading. We're looking at a legacy of degradation on the Bear River, right? We realize that the Bear is this, when we heard a little bit from Jody today, we learned that the Bear River is this own kind of special type of river system that exists. And it's highly demanded, and it's more of a canal than it is a river. And the river has been degraded because of that. As the primary water source for the Great Salt Lake, it needs some attention. And whether it's reconnecting to the floodplain, reducing the channel erosion, providing shading and riparian habitat, how do we make sure that this landscape that feeds our Great Salt Lake is also healthy? So this is a busy slide, but what this slide shows is that the future of conservation is on private lands. We're not going to be buying more refuges. We're not going to be buying more highly managed waterfowl management areas. Like that Teddy Roosevelt era of the set-aside, that's done. The era that we're in now is how are we incentivizing private landowners to have wildlife-friendly practices on their land. And whether you're a private duck club, which is an expensive endeavor to manage all these wetlands that are out there, or whether you're a farmer, whether you're Hannah growing alfalfa, like how do we incentivize you to make sure that your lands are as highly productive for wildlife as possible? And what this slide shows is that these white-faced ibis are moving back and forth. Maybe Hannah's Field's in there, I don't know, but they're going back and forth between those alfalfa fields and the wetlands where they roost. And we don't know that unless we're using science to understand this interrelationship between working lands and wetlands. So understanding where these important working lands are, protecting them, incentivizing landowners to keep going, that's a key component of what we're very interested in. Land conservation also means protection, preservation. Ducks Unlimited is one of the largest land trusts in the United States. Fun fact. Here in Utah, we're fledgling. We don't own a mini fee title, and we don't own mini conservation easements, but that's starting to change. There's a acquisition that we're working on called the RP Wetlands up by the refuge, and we're working to be a facilitator. So how can we be an intermediary? How can we move fast, like Tim was talking about? How can private industry move faster than the government? How can we protect this piece of property and then facilitate that acquisition to the migratory bird refuge? But all of these private working lands, these private wetlands around the lake, those are areas that require protection as well. And so we're very interested in looking not just up in the Bear River area, but around the lake. Of course, Phragmites, we've been fighting it for 40 years since the lake started to go back down. We think that there's a tremendous opportunity in terms of near-term action to expand the amount of Phragmites control that we're doing around the lake. And we've got some, I'll show you a couple slides on some innovative science work that we're doing to help be strategic and be targeted, and where can we get the best bang for our buck on Phragmites control, not necessarily in the lake bed, but in that surrounding landscape in the watershed. This science also is going to tell us about how do we prioritize where wetlands need the most conservation work. So when you're thinking about a changing climate, what the same technology that we're using to map Phragmites can tell us is, like, what is the persistence of wetlands on the landscape? How often are they wet still? And how much are these more seasonal, these more ephemeral wetlands drying out? And then how do we prioritize? Do you try to stop the drying of those more seasonal ones, or do you try and make sure that the ones that are persistently wet continue to be persistently wet? Science is going to help us determine where do you make these investments, and where do you get the best bang for your buck from a wetland conservation standpoint. And then when we think about what does this all mean, what it means is that policy is really what is going to drive, and this isn't really a policy slide, this is a cinnamon teal that moves back and forth in the migratory bird refuge. But what policy does is it helps us do things like this. It helps us pave the way, and we're so blessed that Representative Snyder and Representative Hawks, when he was in the legislature, and Joel, they paved the way to where we are today. And without those leaders in policy, you can't do it. Like, there's no project, there's no infrastructure project that's going to save us. It's really going to be policy paving the way, and this interaction between science and implementation that are going to get it done at the end of the day. And I don't know how many times we've seen this slide today already, but it's situation critical here. It takes a community. It takes all of the partners. Our vision and this action plan is essentially based off of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's strategic plan. It's based on our interactions with Riley Peck and his team, and Ben Steierman and his team, and a bunch of other partners that we've collaborated with to come up with how can we put a little DU flavor on a strategic plan that's a little more adapted to what we're interested in, and how do we grow. And this is still work in progress, as every day it changes in terms of what our landscape looks like, what our political, what our social landscape looks like. And we're interested in being a convener of partners to bring us together to do this implementation. All right, so it's action time. So what does that look like? Well, here's a short list of $44 million worth of projects that we can do right now. Give us $44 million and we'll do it. Easier said than done. And actually, we just had a call. I had a text earlier today from our DC staff that were asking about, hey, give us a list of projects, because we're talking about this $1 billion with the administration. So I texted Karina, and she scrambled and put together a list of $71 million worth of projects. So it's already grown. The slide's already out of date, and it's a week old. The map on the right just kind of this is you can see that from the names, they're scattered all up and down the east side of the lake there. And this is another slide of the kind of the fun. That's our wish list. This is a slide of active projects that we've completed, active project and ones that we've completed. I don't really have them listed up. Some of them are listed in terms of when they're done, but we're actively doing these things. So what does that look like? Okay, well, I'm going to talk about two major projects that we did just this last year, and they're located right under that star at the end of the Jordan River. So one of them was the Vernon Dam retrofit, and so this is a picture of an 80-year-old or so structure. Catches a lot of trash, is rusting, the concrete is failing. I don't know if I would walk across that catwalk to operate. And so what we did is we put a brand new system in there that has modern technology, and now every drop of water we can account for as it comes through this system. The other big dam that's a dam. It was a dam, right? That's another one of these legacy projects that's in trouble. The interesting thing about this project is you could actually see it from, I don't know if I have that slide in there. That's what it looks like when we had to stop the Jordan River from flowing, rip that thing out, put a whole new project, a pad and concrete infrastructure in there to replace that. This is what it looked like from space. This is actually a Google Earth image. I was like, I wonder if I could see that. Well, there it is. And both of those projects are right there on the Jordan River. And these don't necessarily give more water to the lake. What these do is help create a vibrant wetland ecosystem when the lake's in trouble right now. That's what these projects are doing. So Phragmites, I talked about this. So Patrick Donnelly, who's up here in the front with us, just started with DU in December, and this is Google Earth imagery. This is Google Earth Engine. And so we can take every 12 days, I think, Landsat takes an image of every spot on the planet, and you can get, as a nonprofit, you can get 40 years worth of imagery. The downside is you need a data center to process it. But it helps you look at, maybe not a new one, but maybe you got somewhere, maybe Nebraska, there's a data center that we can use. Yeah, the downsides of conservation, right? You need big data to process where do you prioritize and it turns out, right, so Landsat is infrared technology, so you can see wet areas. And actually you can get the signature of Phragmites through Landsat imagery, and you can actually do a map and target where can you get the best bang for your buck. Do you do these little small areas, or do you do a bigger area? At the end of the day, it does take a community to do conservation, because this is really, really hard work. And what I would say too, when I think about, looking at this image, is that it's situation critical and it's all hands on deck. There's nowhere else in the West that I work in, that I'm familiar with, that has a community as strong and as resolved as the one here in Utah to help save the Great Salt Lake, right? The fact that we're creating national attention because our governor is providing the leadership, and our commissioner of the natural resources is providing leadership, and our legislature is providing leadership, and our private citizenry is providing leadership. Like, this community, and Josh is absolutely right, if nobody can do it, if this community can't do it, nobody can do it. Right? There's nowhere else in such a small landscape dealing with such a big problem that is so together and focused on solving that problem. And we're just really, really proud to be part of this team, to be part of this community, and to lend our shoulder and our expertise to this effort. And in fact, you can be part of our team. We are hiring right now we're expanding our team. We've got 3 full-time staff here in Utah right now. We've got a biologist and an engineer position that are open. So we're essentially a nonprofit wetland engineering company. We have civil engineers, we have biologists, we write grants, we do permitting, we do the design work, we do the analysis work. We make sure that the projects that we put on the ground are the best thing for that particular site. And you can join our team. So there's Karina. There's Patrick, that's Regina Stafford in the back there. She's going to be leading our ag program and trying to develop what that is for us, for Ducks Unlimited here. And then that's Mitch Jenkins, and he's managing our Bear River project. There's Corey stretching up, putting our high-tech survey grade, GPS satellite survey grade equipment up to use there. So, let's do this together, because together we synergize, right? The sum of the whole is greater than the individual parts. And that's what it's going to take to solve this problem. We're happy to be here. We're excited. We're optimistic. And we're going to make some great things happen. And I can't wait to tell you about them when I come up here next time. Thank you. If anybody got any questions? One question in the back. 2 questions.
Why not? So there's so many different fronts to be doing this work on with wetlands, from the beavers to the wetland infrastructure updates. But one of the big tools that we've lost recently is legal protection for wetlands that don't have a continuous surface connection to navigable waters of the United States. And I know that that was a Supreme Court decision, and what are you going to do about that? It's really hard to know. But is there anything going on at the policy level to reestablish some better protections for wetlands that don't have that continuous surface connection, especially in times of drought and diversions, where I imagine that might impact the surface connections when things are really dry. So.
Yeah, it's a good question. And what my interpretation of what the Supreme Court was doing is essentially putting the onus on the states to manage. You know, the federal government assumed a mandate, and the Supreme Court kind of dialed that back quite a bit. So really what it's coming down to is the states. So our regional office is in California, one of the most heavily regulated states in the country, and they have a waters of the state. So they essentially have taken over what the Army Corps is not taking over in terms of managing isolated wetlands in the state. So in some states, Washington is the same thing. Those are covered. I'm not familiar with any efforts in Utah to do something similar to that. And it gets kind of to that question of what is a jurisdictional wetland, right? What is that connectivity? And then what are these other wet areas that are not considered a wetland?
So I'm here as a member of the public as well. Utah native, but spent a lot of time in Nebraska. So Nebraska's been taking some pot shots today, but we're actually very good at doing this sort of thing and convening and whatnot. So question I wanted to ask to the Rising team, and maybe to you if you've got some perspectives on it, is the role of private capital, in particular with the things that you presented. Where are there investment opportunities to come in and help, cash flow easements? I'm in the solar industry now, and that's often a tool you can use to increase value off of land, to do other things. So are there any of these where you feel that private capital, be it corporate or otherwise, can come in to help cash flow some of these things?
There's always so Ducks Unlimited is a 501c3 nonprofit. We exist off of private philanthropy. There's a reason why we're a nonprofit wetland restoration consulting company, is because there's no money in it, and it takes private capital in order to leverage the grant money that we get. So a lot of the funds that are going to be, we're not doing $44 million worth of projects on our donors. They're the seed money that drives all that, and they're the leverage that we get from North American Wetland Conservation Act or Enhancement Trust grants. So private philanthropy plays a huge role in terms of leveraging public dollars, because just like the state and buying U.S. Magnesium was, they wouldn't necessarily do it unless it was backed by some kind of private capital. So knowing that others have a vested interest is key. Finding those one of the things that we're very interested, DU is very interested in looking at, are what are these multiple benefits that a wetland conservation project might have. So what are these ecosystem services that might happen? And it might be aquifer recharge. We do a wetland restoration project. We put water on the ground and it recharges the aquifer, or it cleans up the water quality. It could be also like Phragmites when we talk about volumetric benefits, which is the kind of the ecosystem term for doing something that adds more water back to the system. Like that's a lot of what Josh was showing us. Those are ecosystem benefits. Those are volumetric benefits. And so we think that there's opportunity to partner with corporations that are interested. Like we do a lot of work with Nestle and PepsiCo across the country, where they're interested in replenishing water from washing potatoes for the potato chips. Okay, well, we can do a wetland restoration project. You can help us do this wetland restoration project and even fund it and take credit for the volumetric water benefits that it creates, and we get great wetland habitat. Like, we don't necessarily are worried about the credit that you get. We're not interested in the credit. We're interested in the impact that it happens. So I definitely think there's a role for industry to play in this part, because there's sustainability goals that various companies have that I think can be realized when they're at the table and they're also putting their shoulder to the wheel here in Utah. Thank you.
Do you have like sound or videos or anything?
Just videos.
Okay, great. If they should.
But it doesn't need to have sound.
Okay, great. They should all be connected. Just so you know. Is that view okay for you?
Yep.
Okay. And you can advance here with the clicker, laser pointer.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Let's see. Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Veals. I'm a professor of atmospheric sciences here at the University of Utah. And I'm going to talk about cloud seeding today. So as we all know here quite well, water resources in Utah are stressed. Water use is increasing, climate's warming, we've got a shrinking Great Salt Lake, and we've got a Colorado River that is being divvied up amongst more people with fewer flows. So of course addressing these will be an eternal challenge for Utah. But one of the strategies that's been employed by the state is the use of cloud seeding or precipitation enhancement. So pure water does not freeze, believe it or not, until minus 40 Fahrenheit. So if you had pure distilled water, it would not freeze until minus 40 Fahrenheit. So for temperatures between 32 Fahrenheit and minus 40 Fahrenheit, changing water to ice requires what's called an ice nucleus, a little seed to kick off this process of turning from a liquid into a solid. And so here's what that looks like in the lab. So there's a bottle of water in there of distilled water chilling in that alcohol bath, and it's at about 20 Fahrenheit or so. And we're going to drop a seed, a little piece of silver iodide into that. And then you can see that instantly causes this supercooled liquid, it's called, to change to ice. So each of these ice nuclei, depending on what they're made of, will allow freezing at a different temperature. So if it's made of clay, for example, you'll see this is really relevant to Utah because that's a lot of the ice nuclei in clouds or particulates in clouds in Utah are bits of clay dust. You'll need to cool that water all the way down to 5 Fahrenheit or so, something like that, to get it to turn to ice. On the other hand, if that ice nucleus is a bacteria, a certain type of bacteria, say, you may only need to cool that down to 28 Fahrenheit to get it to turn to ice. And so here's how we apply all that to clouds. So every droplet or ice crystal in a cloud forms on a tiny particle, so a speck of dust or bacteria like this floating in the air. So here's what that looks like if you were to zoom way in with a microscope. And so for a typical cloud in Utah at 15 Fahrenheit, almost every cloud droplet that's formed on a speck of that desert dust will be liquid. So you can see all those liquid droplets in there. And this, as I mentioned, we call that, when it's still liquid below 32 Fahrenheit, we call that supercooled liquid, or SLW. You'll see that in this talk a few times. So every droplet formed on bacteria, on the other hand, these little green dots up there, will be an ice crystal. And so the cloud will be mostly liquid droplets with some ice crystals mixed in. So in these mixed phase clouds, they're called, because you have a mix between the liquid phase and the solid phase of water. In these mixed phase clouds, the ice crystals grow faster than the liquid droplets. So you can probably see where we're going there. If these ice crystals grow faster than the liquid droplets, you could, if you turned more of those droplets into ice crystals, in theory, you would increase the total amount of snow falling out of the cloud. So you can see there, if you turn more of those to snow, or if you were to put more bacteria or silver iodide into this cloud, something that's a good ice nucleus, you'll do just that. You'll cause more mass to fall out of the cloud. So you can see that's basically what cloud seeding is just putting a lot of really good ice nuclei into the cloud. So here's how that looks out in the real world. You have to have a pre-existing cloud. You can't just dump a bunch of silver iodide into a clear sky. You have to have a cloud that's either precipitating or near precipitating. It's got a lot of water and it's very close to precipitating. And you can either use ground-based generators to burn the silver iodide, or you can use flares on an aircraft as well. And both of these are done in Utah, and then in theory you get more precipitation falling out of the cloud. And mountains are a perfect place to do this because the clouds are often fixed to the mountains or nearly fixed to the mountains, so it's a great place to do that. You don't have to worry about your storm drifting off somewhere else. So a little background on seeding clouds with silver iodide. It was first done in the 1940s by a couple folks, including a guy named Bernard Vonnegut. And for you sci-fi fans, this is actually the brother of Kurt Vonnegut, the famous sci-fi novelist. And it's really great. I love this because I'm close with my brother too. Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book that involves an ice nucleus. It's called Cat's Cradle. If you have some time, it's a really wild read. So anyway, it wasn't until the 60s and 70s, though, until this started happening in the West, till it started being used in the West in a serious way to try to generate more precip. But it turns out, though, this is really hard. So the primary reason why it's very hard is that the natural variability of precip may be 50 times. It can vary by a factor of 50 in a winter storm in Utah. So if you take the liquid equivalent, so either rainfall or if it's snowing, the amount that the snow would melt down to, you could get anywhere in light precip, you could get 100th of an inch an hour, 0.01, to 0.5 inches an hour. So you have a 5,000% variability in your precipitation just in nature alone. And then if you have something like silver iodide where you're, hoping for a few percent increase, it's really hard to detect that signal and all of that noise. So perfectly illustrating this is one of the studies from, let me see if this mouse shows up. Yeah. So this was from a campaign in Colorado in the 60s and 70s. So there's two different campaigns, and these numbers are the ratio of the precipitation during the seeded periods versus unseeded periods. And you look at your seeded area, like this area in the vicinity of Leadville, and you go, oh, cool, a factor of 2 increase in precipitation. Like, that's amazing. Well, but you go upwind, where, 100 miles upwind to Grand Junction, where you couldn't possibly have had any seeding material get there, and you have a factor of 2 increase as well. So what that tells you is that just if you selected a bunch of random precipitating hours during a bunch of random storms, you could still get this like factor of 2 variability between your 2 periods, even though nothing was done to them. So then if you're trying to figure out the signal of seeding in there, that's particularly difficult or basically impossible. And what you need to do is you just have to have a massive sample so that your signal gets large enough amongst all this noise. And what kind of underpins this process, without getting too much into the mathematical weeds, is something called statistical significance, where basically you get at this effect, right? Like you look at what are the chances based on this sample, like what are the chances that these two differences could have just arisen by just natural variability. And so this statistical significance testing wasn't really done much up until around the turn of the century in a lot of these cloud seeding studies. Another big challenge in a lot of these studies in the 1900s was visualization. A lot of these studies, they just had like a description of what happened. And, for anyone who's read modern scientific papers, like just describing something without a figure doesn't really mean a lot. But finally, we had this result, Hobbs et al., 1981. They still relied on some descriptions and fuzzy figures, but we finally got a clear result. So this was in Washington State. They had this non-precipitating stratus deck, so stratus clouds, just these big, heavy gray clouds, and they seeded them with an aircraft, and immediately right where the aircraft had seeded, you had this big shaft of precipitation falling out. You can see this is a radar image. Finally, they're using radar to look at these effects. So this hints, at that point you go, well, maybe aircraft and better radar plots are the future here. So ground-based seeding, though, remains very difficult to quantify for those reasons I mentioned. The most scientifically sound stab was taken at this by this project called the Wyoming Weather Modification Pilot Project. So this was published in a well-regarded, peer-reviewed journal, and all their methods were signed off as really good, statistically rigorous methods. And so they used 2 neighboring mountain ranges in southern Wyoming. So this Medicine Bow mountain range where they seeded, and then the upwind mountain range, the Sierra Madre, they didn't seed. And so then they called these random periods for seeding versus non-seeded periods. So they compared, the lift between seeded and non-seeded periods in the medicine bows, and then the lift between the seeded and non-seeded periods in the Sierra Madres, which obviously they weren't seeding. So that is a good way, this sort of target control situation is a good way of quantifying the effect of seeding. And like I said, they did it over 6 seasons, and they used this ground-based seeding. They said perhaps a 3% lift during seedable storms, which would be like 1% lift season total, but for the nerds out there, their p-value was like 0.78, so that's technically not really statistically significant. Like you would need a p-value of 0.95, so not really much of a signal or any signal there. The 2017 Snowy campaign in Idaho, however, was a game changer. So completely different methods here. They used aircraft seeding with flares. They had great coverage with these mobile radars. They stuck them on a couple mountains in the area. And then also southern Idaho has a great climate for seeding a lot of these super cool liquid water laden clouds. And what they found was an unmistakable enhancement of snowfall following the aircraft's flight track. So the aircraft is flying this way, following this red line. It's just going back and forth, back and forth. The wind is blowing this way, and so you can see these tracks following the aircraft just keep going downwind. And there's the accumulated precipitation from during that event. You can see just basically radar precipitation in the shape of where the aircraft was flying. So this was, and this was really, really well done in terms of scientific methods. This was published in peer-reviewed journals. The water generation that they found ranged from 2.3 acre-feet in one event per minute to 11.4 acre-feet per minute in another event. That certainly wouldn't on its own with one aircraft solve the Great Salt Lake issues because you're talking 15 million acre-feet, but certainly sounds like something that would be helpful. And taking that to Utah, where 95% of our water resources come from snowpack, unsurprising that we've been paying for cloud seeding for decades. The programs have been funded traditionally at the local level with a 50% cost share by the Board of Water Resources. And in 2022, when we hit the record low levels, this helped prompt a huge increase in the seeding budget. And it was traditionally done with ground-based generators and also occasional flights from one twin-engine aircraft. But now with new technology and contracting with companies, there's also the option of drone-based seeding. So that was part of the prompting. A number of things were, but that was part of the prompting for the SNOWSCAPE project, which was funded by the state Department of Natural Resources. So this SNOWSCAPE project, which stands for Seeded and Natural Orographic and Winter Storms and Catchment Processes Evaluation Study. We scientists love our acronyms. So seeded and natural is important there because we also did, for efficiency of the use of taxpayer dollars, we also did a lot of non-seeding research. If you're out there with all these advanced instruments, we also did a lot of research to improve the skill of weather forecasts in mountainous regions. And then you see catchment processes in here. So there was a lot of hydrologic and snowpack type stuff that was done as well, not just on the weather stuff. We did stuff above the snowpack, and we also did stuff from the snowpack on down too. So here's a look at the study region and all the fancy instruments that we used. I won't go through all of them, but I'll do some highlights here. So out on the Antelope Island Causeway, we had one of these mobile radar trucks. And then here at the base of the causeway, we were launching weather balloons. We had a vertically pointing radar up at Snow Basin. We had another vertically pointing radar. We had a snowpack energy balance site. And then up at Powder Mountain, we had an entire lab's worth of this microphysical measurement equipment, which I'll get into later, packed into a shipping container. We also had another mobile radar in Huntsville, and then we had a bunch of precipitation gauges throughout the region as well. So a lot of great stuff for studying this topic. So I'll go through a few of the research questions here. These are a little nerdy, but kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at, hopefully. The first one, how do the physical characteristics, so radar structures, particulate concentrations, et cetera, of seeded and unseeded storms vary across the northern Wasatch Range? So you look at, one of the things we're looking at is like when you have a flow from, say, the west, what are the conditions that control where your precipitation is going to form, how intense it is, where the supercooled liquid water will or won't be? You know, a perfect example, one of the things in this mountain range that's really interesting is some of the storms, you actually get more of the precipitation falling downwind of the mountains. This is a radar image from one of those events. So that's been a particular area of interest for my part of the team from sort of just the improving the forecasting of weather in mountainous regions as well. So then getting back into sort of the precipitation physics side of things, here's a little cartoon that kind of shows you, you have all these things from the surface of the Earth being lofted into the sky that can serve as these ice nuclei in clouds. And so we measured with a bunch of these little boxes here, particle concentration and size across that elevation transect going from, the Great Salt Lake out to up to the top of the mountain and then out past Huntsville as well. And then we also had, this is what I mentioned, this super site at Powder Mountain to provide much more information on these microphysical properties. So all these things that you can only tell with these very specific instruments. We packed them, or I should say Gannett Haller's team at the University of Utah packed these into a shipping container. And, some of the things that we're looking at, one of the most pressing ones is how many particles become ice nuclei at each temperature. So you have to characterize this whole distribution of temperatures and the amounts of ice nuclei at each of those temperatures to understand what's going on in the clouds. And this will help us understand the seeding potential of both natural and silver iodide particles. So, one thing to keep in mind is we're also constantly seeding all of these storms with a huge array of particles from just having a big city upwind of these mountain ranges as well. So that's a big part of what Gannett's team was looking at as well. So another research question, how accurate are model simulations of these individual storms? Model simulations are really key in atmospheric research because you can't do a controlled experiment with the atmosphere. You can't tell the Earth to rewind a storm and change some conditions and then play it again. But with these model simulations, you can. You can do a control run and then you change something about it, you turn a knob, and then you run the same event over again. So these can be really helpful, but they're not a perfect approach. One particular area of caution I like to urge is that these models can't resolve these really microphysical processes like nucleating ice that I described, and so it's parameterized, which means you kind of hard code into the model. You just say if there's this many particles, just make a cloud that looks like this. And so you're kind of telling it the answer ahead of time. So, in my opinion, it's not really appropriate for the did seeding or didn't it help in this particular storm. But it can be helpful for a lot of these studies, like where your seed was dispersed, how far it got, how high it got, things like that. So another research question was what is the impact on snowpack accumulation, radiative forcing, melt rate, and runoff in these Ogden and Weber basins? So this is these hydrology and snowpack type questions, getting to the surface of the snowpack and below, that Mackenzie Skiles and Paul Brooks at the University of Utah looked into. So in this stuff, it's important to just kind of go through like a hydrology 101 kind of thing. So any change you have in precipitation is going to be balanced by some combination of a change in stream flow, a change in evaporation, or a change in storage. Storage being like groundwater, aquifers, storage in the soil, things like that. And so this is really important. One of the kind of key reasons this is being explored by those guys in this campaign was this finding that precipitation alone only explains 43 to 73% of your stream flow variability. So put another way, in that 2022-2023 season where we had record snowpack in Utah, we did not have record runoff. We had above average, but not record-breaking huge runoff. So a lot of this precipitation went elsewhere, so either into storage or into increased evaporation. So this tells you two things. One is that ground storage is a big deal, and this is a lot of the work that Mackenzie and Paul are doing, and then also that the ablation rate of snow is a big deal. So ablation means loss of snow. We don't say snow melt because it can be lost to melting or evaporation to the atmosphere or sublimation to the atmosphere as well. So on the topic of ablation rate, this is important because slower ablation increases the fraction of snow that is lost as vapor into the atmosphere. So if the melt starts earlier in winter, less water makes it into streams. So if you start your melt, say in March, the snowpack is sitting there for all these months slowly melting, but it also had a long time to be evaporating into the atmosphere. Whereas if you had a cold winter and you held off on any melt until May, in May the sun angle is really high, there's a lot more potential for warm events, and it just melts really fast and just goes right into the streams. And so this ablation rate is a big factor in determining how and where our water makes it into the streams. And so sort of these questions that Mackenzie and Paul's teams were tackling on this water question were how does snowfall and particulate deposition influence the snowpack? So like, does seeding change like when your snowpack melts? Can it protect it a bit from having a dust layer at the top, which is going to melt the snowpack faster? And then they also, of course, want to know the impacts of cloud seeding on stream flow, so where it's increasing stream flow, if it is, and how much. And then also, how do these different strategies and watershed conditions affect this transition from precipitation to stream flow? So this was the final component of the project. Here's some of the methods that they used. You can see this is one of their snow energy balance sites. They were up there digging snow pits, putting precipitation gauges in. So this was a really important campaign for characterizing water resources in Utah, both in the air and on the ground. So it'll be really exciting to see the campaign concluded in April this year. So it'll be really exciting to see some of these results start to come out. So as I mentioned, though, this will improve the prediction of snowfall in mountainous regions and our understanding of mountain weather in general. So aside from seeding, this will be really beneficial. And then on the seeding aspect, it will also improve our understanding of how seeding affects the snowpack and the runoff in the basin. But this has also brought up a urgent future need, which is a dedicated, detailed quantification study to get the precise amount of water generated in the way that snowy study was done, which is not going to be accomplished by SNOWSCAPE, but hopefully in a follow-on project it will. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm short. Okay, I'm going to hold it. So my question was in terms of cloud seeding. So it's not that we didn't get precipitation this last season. It's just that it didn't come as snow. So going forward, is there anything like research-wise to do with that, or is that just more climate change, or anything that cloud seeding can be related to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple things. One, I talked a bunch. I had that exact question about sort of how a winter like that, where our precipitation, it wasn't like record low precipitation. It was mainly that it was low precipitation-ish, but like really, really warm. And so Paul and Mackenzie told me that the big thing with being rain-driven versus snow melt-driven is that you're going to lose more of your precipitation to evaporation than you would from locking it up in a snowpack. So your precip won't go as far. It won't get you as much runoff in a rain-driven winter versus a snow melt-driven winter. But then, yeah, as far as this winter, I mean, this was a good kind of view of what winter is going to look like, what an average winter will look like for us in, say, like 30 years or so. I don't know what the final numbers as far as, what the average temperature was in Utah, but I think a good ballpark is something like 30 years. This will be an average winter in terms of temperature.
This is probably a policy question, maybe not so much a science question, but if I'm thinking about, if you force the clouds to release the precipitation when they wouldn't have otherwise, and then it presumably would have fallen somewhere else, and they don't receive that moisture, has that been discussed?
That's the million-dollar question, I think. That question makes me want to get into water law, because I think those are the people that are, if you're a water lawyer, I think you're going to have a lot of cases on that going forward. So, I feel like it's not been studied adequately, in my opinion. I've heard folks in my field say that, you only lose like 0.1. So if you were to quantify the amount of water going by Snow Basin, say Mount Ogden, every second in a winter storm, only 0.1% of that is falling out at any one time. So you're like, 99.9% is left. Well, but that appears to be enough to make the downwind mountain ranges drier, right? Like in these deep mountain ranges, say like the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, where you have a bunch of valleys all lined up, they get drier as you go downwind. So apparently wringing out 0.1% over each big ridge line is enough to dry it out. So that's my take, but I've heard a lot of folks that dispute that. So I think it'll be interesting. I think that's one of the things that really needs to be studied is how much is lost to downwind mountain ranges.
Thank you for that presentation. And my question is about the volume and temperature. Well, it's our greatest snow on Earth, but the Great Salt Lake contributing a mass of maybe moisture evaporating and the temperature of it, that it never gets that ice cap throughout the winter. Does that significantly contribute to the amount of precipitation that we receive? And I might have a follow-up question.
Yeah, that's a great question. The lake effect snow is definitely a thing on the Great Salt Lake. There's a really good study that was done in, I think, 2013 by Kristen Yeager and Jim Steenberg in our department. And they quantified, this was though using 20 years of data up until 2013 when the lake was a lot bigger. They found that I believe in the Oakers, about 5% of the winter snowpack, in terms of water, 5% of the snow water equivalent in the snowpack in the Oakers comes from lake effect precipitation. That drops to about, I believe, 2% or so in the central Wasatch. But that was with the old lake. I don't know. The lake has decreased a lot in size since that time. So I think that's an open question. Anecdotally, as a weather nerd, a snow nerd, and a snow lover, I think we have had a lot less lake effect events since I started keeping track of it in 2012 when I moved here. So I think we have lost a lot of that contribution, a lot of that 2 or 5% contribution in lake effect precipitation from the lake.
And is that, I guess this wasn't going to be my follow-up question, but that lake effect, is it the moisture coming off the lake, or is it the existence of the lake that kind of creates the extra precipitation? That's
a great question. It's the heat and the moisture. So it's the fact that, you have to have an air mass that is a lot cooler than the lake. And then you also have to have that air mass be relatively moist, because the lake contributes some, but it needs a little bit to start with. But so in those scenarios, the lake is adding heat and moisture, and that's causing your air parcels to rise and condense into clouds.
Okay, so this is my follow-up question. So we trapped tens of thousands of beaver out of the Wasatch when the trappers showed up, 100 plus years ago. And my question is, what do you think would happen if we brought a lot of those beavers back and had them building dams that were putting more water, that would get the ice cap on it? But what would happen? Would that help us?
I mean, you would need to equate, so whatever the change in surface area of the lake has been, say from 2005 to 2025, you would need to be building that much additional surface area of water. That would be a lot of beavers, I think. I don't know how much, what acreage that is and what acreage a beaver pond is, but I think it would be a lot. But it would certainly be very fun. I would like that. Cool. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Click here, click here. Wow, you guys are troopers. Thanks so much for sticking it out for the last session of the first day of the Issues Forum. I need your help with two things. But before I ask for your help, I'd just like to say, without getting too choked up, so Lynn has been convening the Great Salt Lake Issues Forum since 1996, and I've been here for, I think, almost all of them, but with each one, my heart just swells to see her effort and dedication and commitment to everybody, and then also the growing number of support and people in the community. It's just overwhelming, and I think it's been since COVID. COVID was the most memorable time where I was just, and I remember talking to Lynn, and we didn't have the Issues Forum because of COVID, and it just kind of sunk in my heart. And so now, just with each Issues Forum, my heart grows to see all of you people here. So I would like you all to stand up and give Lynn and her team a round of applause, and also turn around to your neighbors and thank them for sticking it out today for the last event. Okay? Okay. Very good. All right. You're all troopers, and we really appreciate Lynn and her commitment. So that request number one, and it was also two-sided because I wanted you guys to wake up. So hopefully that woke you up a little bit, and you're ready to pay attention for 30 more minutes, I promise. The other request I have is to get your thumbs ready and your phones out, because we are going to have what I recall is maybe the first ever interactive Great Salt Lake Issues Forum interactive event. And that will be led by our awesome team at Envision Utah here today to help me with the public involvement with the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. But before we dive into that, I just give a 5-minute update on the Basin Plan. We've talked about this project at the last Issues Forum. It is the first ever comprehensive plan that looks at water planning for the entire Great Salt Lake Basin. And I love this image for so many reasons, but first and foremost, it illustrates the entire system. And I think when we have been thinking about Great Salt Lake, we think about it as the Bear River Basin or the Jordan River Basin or the Weber, and we don't look at the whole. We measure water differently in each of the systems, each of the maybe conservation districts, and we're all not comparing apples to apples. We're not looking at the system as a whole, and this project, this endeavor seeks to do that. And what I think is also great about this slide is it shows all of the components, and then if you could look and consider all the people that are involved in all of these components of the basin, you can see that if you tweak something maybe in ag use or in wetlands flows, how does that impact Great Salt Lake? How does that influence the demand on our water system? And so you can just see that the system here, the entire system is connected, and for the first time ever, we're building a model, we're building a tool to look at how, if we tweak some of the management strategies within each of these components, what are the impacts? So to maybe give you a bit more detail, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan is a roadmap for managing water to ensure a healthy Great Salt Lake. But this isn't just a project to ensure a healthy lake. It's also to ensure that we all enjoy the quality of life that we have come to know and love here in Utah. So we want to make sure Great Salt Lake has the water it needs, but all of the water uses in the basin have their needs as well. And you've heard several times today already about the numerous amount of plans. Well, this is one of the ones that Blake showed in his diagram. This is the integrated plan that is kind of over the whole basin. It connects to the governor's 2034 strategy. The commissioner's office has a strategic plan right now. This integrated plan will become the long-term plan for the commissioner's office. And it is also part of a basin study that's run by the Bureau of Reclamation that is being done in concert with this project. So to complete this project, it takes an army, a village. This is a way to articulate or to illustrate some of our village. The Division of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation are leading this project with oversight by the Commissioner's Office. We're relying heavily on the watershed councils. The Division of Water Resources, a bill run by Tim Hawks maybe about 5 years ago, set into place these watershed councils. We're using these as the jumping off point, information gathering, like receiving and giving point for some of the management strategies, some of the trade-off analyses that we'll be doing. And then within each of the river basins, the watershed councils, we have tech teams. So for the Weber River, we have a team that knows where all of the diversions are in the Weber River Basin, and for the Jordan River, where all of the diversions are in the Jordan River Basin. So we're putting all of these pieces together like they've never been done before. And this multi-year process is taking about multiple years longer than it should. Like, I wish it would be done yesterday. I wish this whole project was completed 10, 20 years ago, and we would have this tool that exists, and we haven't had the time, momentum, and energy. But now, as you've seen today, we've got the energy, we've got the momentum. So let's take advantage of it, and we're going to do this multi-year project. It takes some time. It takes some time to build the tool. We have some engineers working with us right now, hydros and precision engineers who work on the Colorado River Basin, who are developing this model, this river basin model, that will help us test our scenarios. So right now we're in phase one. We're creating what are the priorities and management alternatives. That's what we're going to need your help with. And then once we get a list of management alternatives, we're going to group them into scenarios and then figure out how we'll vary those scenarios when we put them through the model and understand what the impacts of each of the different scenarios are and then what those trade-offs are. We've heard a lot about trade-offs today. What is an acceptable level of impact for one resource, groundwater, to lake level, for example, or what is an acceptable level of impact to M&I use to ag? And then we'll synthesize this feedback and write a plan with some recommended actions that we can move forward and begin implementing in 2028. So this is just a straw man or an illustration of what some of our initial model runs will look like. So here are some strategies that we may be looking to tweak: residential water conservation, ag optimization, water leasing, demand management. We pick how we want to fluctuate those, we run them through the model, and then we look at what the impacts would be. But before we look at the impacts, and this is one of the processes we're working on now, is we're trying to identify what the metrics are, or how do we know if we've done a good job? What's a good impact? What's a bad impact? So, for example, a metric for lake level, or a healthy Great Salt Lake, is lake level. So is it a good impact, bad impact? Salinity levels, PM10, ecosystem health. These are all the different ways that we're judging whether the impacts will be good or bad from these different strategies. So what we've heard so far and what we're going to ask you a bit more about today is, how do we measure success on what a healthy Great Salt Lake looks like, what a good quality of life looks like here in Utah. So ecosystem health, air quality, human health, recreation, the Olympics, our legacy, our identity. We talk a lot about our commitment to making this work and how Utah is dig down deep and get to work and solve this problem. How can we make sure that that we're setting ourselves up for success here? And then what are some of the strategies that we could vary in these different analyses? limiting or replacing or limiting useless grass in urban areas, ag optimization, dust mitigation. What are some of the strategies that Dr. Perry mentioned today? How could we implement those? What about wetland management? Could we vary how we treat wetlands in the area? So with that, I'm going to let this sink in, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to pull out your phones and scan this, and Jason will get you started. He'll introduce himself and get you started. And if you are unable to do this survey right now, we'll keep the link up after, and you can do it later. There's a link to our website, Great Salt Lake Basin Plan at utah.gov. It's also on there. And then, yeah, we'll go from there.
Okay. All right. So.
Sorry, I guess are there any questions before we get started?
Okay, so you also, if you have a laptop here, you can also do it on a laptop. Instead of scanning the QR code, just go to utah.startconverge.com/conference. So when you go there, you'll enter in the conference ID 1970-1970. Then you will be directed to a page where it will ask for your name and email address. If you don't want to give that, you don't have to. You can make up a name, you can make up an email address. It just has to have an @ symbol in it so that it knows that it is an email address. This is one of the drawbacks to the software that we use. But other than this, we feel like this is a really cool tool that allows people to be able to weigh in, and it even allows us, as you'll see, to be dynamic with some of the responses that we get, and we can turn them back to you and have you rate them and things. So I'll give everyone just a minute to go there, utah.startconverge.com/conference, or scan this QR code. Conference ID is 1970, and then enter a name and email address to get you logged in to start this session. And we really are going to do this for the rest of our time. So if you're like sitting here thinking, I'm just going to watch, you're going to get bored. So go ahead, pull out your phone or computer, go ahead and sign in to do this. And once we get going, I'll also change the display so that we have the screen, or so that we can see what's happening on the screen. Looks like we have almost 70 people in here, so I think that's probably good.
Guys, good job.
If you get signed in late, it'll just join you where things are. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to bring you to the question. I'll be driving here, so I'll drive you from question to question, and you just need to select the answers and sometimes click submit. It should be pretty easy and self-explanatory. First one is an easy one. The answers this will remain anonymous in the sense that we won't have anyone's name associated with the responses, but we would like to get a sense of what sectors you might be from. So the first question we want to ask you all is, what is your sector or constituency that you represent? We hope we have enough options captured there, but if you could just select which sectors or constituencies you represent here. And yeah, we're going to...
Just do escape, yep, and then to Chrome, and then we can do full screen, green. Perfect. Nice.
All right, we'll give everyone just a quick moment to finish answering that one. Okay, and then thinking about the metrics question that Laura teased up here, we want you to tell us what your 2 or 3 most important priorities for water management in the Great Salt Lake Basin are. So if you were to think of the scenario diagram that we had. If you were to be looking for, what are the things that you're going to look for to know that we are succeeding or failing? What are your priorities, the metrics that you would measure ultimate success of water management in the Great Salt Lake Basin by? And again, we're asking everyone to put in 2 or 3 of these, just your top ones.
You guys are fast on your phone. This is nice.
All right, we have enough responses for everyone to have submitted at least one, so we'll give it another 15 seconds or so. let some come in. And I should be clear. We are asking you to do this because we're going to use this information. This isn't just for a fun exercise here. So we are collecting this information from this group, from other groups that we're doing, analyzing that, and it will feed into the scenarios process that was described, where we will identify the priorities, the metrics that people that matter most, and feed that into the model that's being built. And then create some scenarios where we can evaluate how different management strategies would affect the outcomes that matter most to us. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next question. All right, thinking a little bit more about the priorities that you just identified. Just tell us or elaborate for a moment on how you would measure those things. For some of them, it might be super easy. Maybe it is salinity levels or lake elevation. Maybe that's easy to measure. If it was something different, like I saw some people put things like something about human flourishing or something like that, how would you measure that? So if you have, particularly if you have a harder thing where it's not as obvious how you'd measure that, if you could take just a moment and put down an indicator that you would look for to tell you whether the thing that you care most about is headed in the right or wrong direction. We'll give you just another 20 seconds on that one. Okay, and now we're going to get into to some fun stuff. Not that wasn't fun. That was fun, right? No, so now we're going to, we want to hear what are your priority management strategies. So many strategies over the years have been identified for managing water in the basin, everything from Phragmites removal, berm management, ag optimization, residential conservation, etc. What are the most important strategies that you would like to see pursued as a part of the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan? Or the other way that we like to think about it is on that diagram of potential scenarios that Laura showed, what are the levers you want to pull? What are the things that you would like to, the actions that you would like to see happen in order to serve the outcomes and priorities that you just told us about? And in just a moment, feel free to add a long list here. You can add 2 or 3 if you only have a couple that you care about. If there's 10 that you want to pursue, go ahead and add 10 to this. In just a moment, what we're going to do is try and synthesize this list down to sort of the unique ideas that are represented, and we'll give you a chance to select from that list from that much shorter list what you think the most important ones are. So we can create a really long list here. We're going to try and synthesize it down to just the unique ideas, which might be hard. And Cody and Emma, as you synthesize that list, I think that we could probably shoot for more than our usual ones, because if we got 100 and if we're going to land somewhere between 170 and 200, maybe we shoot for 15 or so summarized unique ideas. And while they are trying to synthesize the unique ideas, I'm going to stall for just a minute. Does anybody have an idea that they want to pitch us on real quick? Take 30 seconds, stand at a mic, and tell us all why your idea is really, really important. Yeah, over here. Do you mind going to a mic to tell us? We'll probably have time for 2 or 3 of these.
The number one thing I keep hearing when I talk to people about water conservation and using less water in their lawns is, I'll do it when I see the church or the library or the police station or whoever do it. And so I think that's really important, like to actually get on those guys and make a public, awareness campaign out of, where people are not seeing, sprinklers going on during a rainstorm at the shopping mall. So.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Anyone else? We have time for 1 or 2 more.
I'm just going to build on that with the how it impacts our individual water bill. How does xeriscaping my lawn change my water bill? And how does the cities and buy-in from like the rest of the community?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. One more. All right. Well, then I'm going to look to Cody and Emma. Are we about ready? Okay. We'll give it just a moment. Okay. So next, you're going to see a list of 14 items, it looks like, that I'll bring you there. You can look at these. We hopefully have captured most of the unique ideas that were offered previously. We had almost 200 or so. So hopefully in this shorter list of 14 things, you can see, something that that you wanted in there represented, hopefully. What I'd like you to do is, of this list of 14 now, select the top 3 things, the 3 that you think are most important. So select your top 3 and then click submit. And then we can kind of see how these things are prioritized. I do want to be clear. This is not like a formal vote, obviously. This is one small group that we're talking about, but we do like to get a sense of where there is more or less support for specific strategies. So looking at this list of strategies, grab your top 3 or check your top 3, click submit, and we will open the mic. If someone feels like a strategy that you wrote is not there and you want us to know about it, you can run to the mic real quick, tell us about it. No takers on that. All right, let's see. We'll give you another maybe 30 seconds or so. Looks like ag optimization and water use reduction, water rights acquisitions, Phragmites removal, municipal and residential conservation, and public education outreach, rounding out the top 5 right now. Berm management and lake level maintenance, not as popular with this group. Pollution control, water quality and groundwater monitoring, also down at the bottom. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on unless anyone is really struggling to figure this out. Okay, seeing none. We're going to move on. Okay, next question. Thinking about the priorities that you just selected, so the 3 that you selected, tell us a little more about them. What is actually required? Now, some of you are going to just type in money. If you could elaborate on that, that would be great. We want to be as specific as possible here to help us be able to understand how do we put this in a scenario that we can turn around back to you and to the public to say, okay, here's a potential package of strategies or of actions for us to take. So think for just a moment, what would be required to implement your strategies successfully? Give you just another 20 seconds on this. And then I want you to, as you're finishing up putting in your implementation ideas here, think about, again, the list of strategies that we just looked at a moment ago. And I want you to think about, is there anything there or in the list that we've been looking at where there are impacts that you think are overlooked? Moving on in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I would like you to take a minute and describe any trade-offs that you think that some people might not be thinking about. For this one, it is helpful if you are specific about the strategies that you're talking about. So we'd love to have sentences like, if we X, insert the thing that you think people aren't thinking about, then something is going to happen that you think people maybe are overlooking. So we want to, we know this is a fairly sophisticated group. We imagine that you have some thoughts about the trade-offs for some of these actions, and we want to give you a second to just voice those so that we can make sure that they are captured and we can implement them in our process. And if you don't have any, that's also fine, but we know that this, there's a lot that a lot of you know about all of the strategies that were mentioned, and so if you're like, oh, this is a bad idea because of X, we want to be able to capture that. And we'll give you just another 30 seconds on that one because it's a little bit longer.
While you're finishing up, I just have to say, when we started doing this, we're like, oh, everyone needs their laptop. They're not going to be able to do it on their phones. It's too cumbersome, and it's just too hard to type all this stuff. But you guys are killing it. This is like the first group where we've just said, bring your phones, and so thank you guys so much.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Hi, Laura. We're going to move on to the next question. So for this one, what we want is for you to tell us about the most significant barriers that you see to ensuring a resilient water supply and a high quality of life in the basin. This one, we are not going to display the results, and I don't think you'll be able to see the results either. So be as specific as you want. If you think there's a person who's getting in the way, go ahead and write their name down. But we want to give you a second to think about what are the most significant barriers that you see that get in the way of us achieving the goal of this basin integrated plan, which is ensuring a resilient water supply for the lake and for a high quality of life in the basin. And then question 2 is who needs to be involved to make this successful? Is there someone that you really think needs to be at the table in helping to shape the basin integrated plan? Maybe someone that already is and you just want to basically put an exclamation point by their name and say, yep, they have to be involved in this. Or someone that you think has maybe been on the sidelines that ought to be there. Again, it can be specific individuals, it can be large groups, it can be industries, it could be organizations. But we'll give you just a moment to answer those 2 questions. Again, these are private questions, so be as specific as you want. What are the most significant barriers to ensuring a resilient water supply and high quality of life in the basin? And who needs to be involved to make this successful? Is there someone who isn't at the table that should be? Okay, I'll give you just a few more seconds on that one. Then we'll go to what hopefully is a fairly quick and easy one. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, this is just a helpful gauge for us to know what we're, or to be able to attach some of this to some of the responses. Are we, or our leaders in the basin, making progress to address the challenges related to the future of water quickly enough and with enough urgency? Please select the option that most closely aligns with your feelings. We'll give you just a few seconds to do that one. Not very many people feeling like we are acting with appropriate urgency right now. Believe it or not. Okay, all right, we're going to go to the last question to bring us home and close out the day. We want to end on kind of a positive note. So if you had to make the argument that this is going to work, that the Basin Integrated Plan, and I would probably lump in a lot of the other efforts that have been talked about today, is going to work, and that we're going to figure out how to have a healthy lake and a high quality of life in the basin, what argument would you make? What would give you that optimism? Or what would you use to make the case that, yeah, this is going to work. We're going to do this. So we'll give you just a minute to add those in at the end of the day, end on a positive note. And then, like Laura said, we will leave the survey or leave this open so that if you have started and you want to keep going, then you can do that. You can also find a slightly different, slightly shortened version of this in survey form at the Basin Integrated Plan website, which is probably gslbasinplan.utah.gov. And I think with that, oh, yeah, was there a question? The other way, if you need to find it on the website, you can also just Google Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. It's usually the first result there, and you can find the Basin Integrated Plan website where you can find the survey. With that, I want to offer my thanks for sticking it out with us for the last little bit here and for answering all of these questions. And Laura, do you have anything you want to say to close it out?
No, just if you also want to go on our website, you can subscribe for our newsletter where we have updates and other opportunities for engagement. So check that out and check our website often. You can also email me, lauravernon@utah.gov, if you have any questions or concerns. And then we really look forward to coming back in 2 years and having a plan for you. But you will hear from us in the meantime through other channels and watershed councils. If you're interested in learning about watershed councils and where you might engage, you can check that out on the Division of Water Resources website as well. So, thank you guys so much.